You turn my mourning into dancing. You turn my mourning into dancing. You turn my mourning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love. Something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. You turn my mourning into dancing. 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 Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything.
Good morning, Rooted Men. Matt Ryan from the Rooted Ministries. Pleasure to be with you this Friday. No, not Friday. Wednesday morning. That's right. I normally only do this on Friday, but this Wednesday morning, tax day, as it were. Not too many people's favorite day. Hopefully, you've already taken care of that. If not, that was your subtle reminder that it's time. So, good Wednesday morning to you. I know it's pretty crazy storms overnight, so hope you're all safe and well. And I heard there were some tornadoes and hail and all kinds of other stuff going on. So pretty wild overnight. But here we are still continuing in 1 Corinthians. We're in chapter 9, verses 13 through 18. And working through as Paul continues to... Oh, that's not the one I wanted. There we go. Paul continues to speak to the church in Corinth. And it seems like a lot of Paul's letters, a lot of his ministry was addressing concerns that were going on, we'll say, whether that be correcting theological issues, correcting behavioral issues, correcting. It seems like there's a lot of correcting going on in Paul's letters, right? And so here in Corinthians, he's addressing specifically today's reading. He's just addressing the support due to the preacher, right? Due to those who are dedicated their lives to sharing the gospel. There's different thoughts, different conversations about it, but what the kind of the idea we're all most comfortable with is that we we support the pastors, we support widows and orphans, right? We feed the Levites, so to speak, right? And all that comes from the offering or the tithe. And that's generally a conversation that comes from tithe, that comes from also offerings, right? And so we think back to the offerings of, sacrificial offerings that were made, burnt offerings, all these kind of different things throughout time. And what we're really talking about here is specifically those offerings that are made at the time, kind of in exchange for learning the gospel, right? You're talking about a time when things weren't really printed, things weren't broadcast like they are now. A lot of people couldn't read it anyway. And so it seems, at least the inference and what we know is that many who were preaching the gospel, or many who were preaching in general, would go from town to town and they would demand money. Basically, they're trading their service of preaching the gospel for money. And that's what Paul is specifically addressing here, that the gospel is something that should be preached for free, basically. Now he is addressing it in both ways. He's not saying that anybody is wrong, because supporting ministry is very important. He's saying he's fortunate enough to not require that, to not use that, which he puts in the context of really kind of losing some of his credibility, but more his right to preach freely, because he's not owned by anyone by their financial support. So don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. But I have not used any of these rights, and I'm not writing this in hope that you will do such things for me, for I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel. So kind of some funky wording, right? Kind of a weird way to put some of it. But what he's saying is he's not disputing the fact that those who are preaching the gospel have a right to be compensated, and that compensation typically comes through that which is shared at the altar, right? That which is shared and given. Now, so many people always say, why does God need my money? Well, here's the example directly where this comes from is that, those who are working the temple get fed by working the temple and the altar, right? So establishing that is the practice, right? Those who work there, that's their reward or their compensation, right? Is that they are fed in that way. Same thing for those who preach the gospel. They're fed by it. In other words, that's how they earn their living, right? And so Paul kind of not bragging, but again, talking about the boasting, right? When I offer it and don't take your money, you can't say that that's my motivation. You can't take away the credibility of the word I'm preaching. In other words, I'm preaching it voluntarily because I'm called to preach. I'm compelled to do what God sent me to do. I'm compelled to share this message that Jesus taught to me in such an intimate way. And so I'm doing it voluntarily, so that my reward is the fact that I get to speak it freely. Again, it's not something we want to get caught up in, and, does this mean that pastors and teachers should not be paid, right? That's obviously not the way we're going. In fact, we desperately underpay our pastors in this country. But he's speaking more to, I think, the credibility of what he's saying, because he's speaking in a defensive position, right? To people who are discrediting, saying, "Oh yeah, you're just here to get money. They just want money. That's why they're preaching these feel-good stories," right? And he's answering that critique directly and saying, "Well, no, I'm not. So you can trust what I'm saying, I suppose, right? I guess really the way it applies to us today, I would say, is that all of us have that freedom. Well, not all of us. Most all of us are not getting paid to preach the gospel. Most all of us are preaching voluntarily when we lift up a friend or a stranger, when we pray over them, when we talk to them about hope. And so we're kind of in that boat with Paul, where we're the fortunate ones. We have nothing to gain financially. We have nothing to gain from this world by sharing our love, by sharing the gospel, by sharing with people that we don't, in other words, we don't get that discredit because we're not asking people for somebody, right? For something. If you see someone at a coffee shop who's struggling, who's crying, and you just ask if they're okay, and it turns into a conversation where they're feeling lost and unknown, and you give them some reassurance that comes from the gospel, you're not holding your hand out and say, okay, that'll be $20, right? Imagine what that transaction would be like. So we have the good fortune of being out of that transactional world and having just the credibility of offering hope and truth and that connective love to people, right? And that's kind of, for me, that's a good takeaway, because when Paul talks about his reward is offering it free of charge, right? My reward is the ability to just speak freely about how I've been changed. The ability to convince someone else that this is the right path, right? Without that exchange, without the transaction. Think of what that means for you, gentlemen. Think of what it means that you have these very same encouraging truths, that you know them, that you felt them, that you've lived them, that you have credibility from them, that you're free to preach them. And no, preaching doesn't just mean standing up in the public square. It doesn't just mean standing up in front of a church. Preaching is often silent, right? Is it Francis of Assisi that said, preach the gospel continuously, when necessary, use words, right? Living it out, being a loving example. We talk about the same power, right? We sing that song all the time, and I want you to think of this the same way. The same freedom, the same powerful words of truth that Paul shared are within you. And you can share them freely just the same way he did. So let's remove some of those obstacles that keep us from sharing boldly the way that Paul did. I think that's a good inspiration for us today. Be like Paul. That's not to say that we necessarily have the perfect view of everything and can call out everyone's behavior the way that Paul was keenly able to do. But that assured presence of the truth, that knowing that I'm standing on something really solid and I'm sharing it because it's what I'm called to do. It comes out of me. I'm compelled to do it. I'm not doing it for any reason, for any personal gain. I'm doing it as an act of love because I care about your salvation. I care about your living freer in this life. So let's think of it that way as we walk through and have our opportunities to evangelize, our opportunities to connect, love, and serve. Let's do it like Paul does, without any fear, without any excuses, viewing it as our opportunity to boast. I love you, gentlemen. I hope that's a good word for you today. I'm going to leave it right there. Let's make it a great day today and have a firmly rooted day, and may someone see Jesus in us today.